Social Justice Initiative is a campus unit that focuses on improving lives through scholarship, teaching, and community engagement, specifically through issues of social justice. This program was originally conceived as a part of our Fierce Urgency of Now documentary series. We realized that we couldn't discuss the planet and our health without talking about Flint. But it didn't stop there. Despite the lack of national attention on the issue, we discovered that there is a lead and water crisis happening throughout the nation. It's bigger than Flint. It's about our environment, it's about our health, it's about the millions of people who are living in communities at risk. So it grew larger than we originally intended, but we really wanted to account for the immensity of this issue, and here we are. The program is meant to be interactive, so we brought a panel of organizers and experts to share their insights and answer some questions that you may have about lead in our pipes and in our water. As you can see on the screens, please feel free to share some of the information that you received tonight. Post your thoughts and your ideas to the hashtag Lead and Lies, and if you also tweet us at the Social Justice Initiative and also the Freshwater Lab, we will likely retweet you and keep the conversation going past today. This entire event would not be possible without the Social Justice Initiative's partnership with the Freshwater Lab. Please give a round of applause and a really warm welcome to the founder of the UIC Freshwater Lab, Rachel Haverlock, as she tells you more about the Freshwater Lab and guides us through a digital activity. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and also thanks to Essence and to Prudence from the UIC Social Justice Initiative, also to Kathleen Mueller and Kathleen Blackburn of the Freshwater Lab, and many colleagues and friends, old and new, for being here tonight. And as often happens in these cases, it's an uncannily appropriate time to talk about infrastructure. And I think that in this room, we might be able to get things a little bit right that are being discussed in ways that might be very, very wrong at a national level. So it's a real moment for local power and to build these relationships and networks with one another. And in that spirit, it's absolutely wonderful to team up with Essence and the Social Justice Initiative and all of you. So for those who are at UIC, Freshwater Lab offers events, a course that will happen in fall 2018. So there are many Freshwater Lab alums in the room. Give a shout out for the people. Yep. And these are the people you're going to want to hire for those that have organizations and businesses in the room. And what we do in that class is we basically put the pressing issues facing the Great Lakes and our water supply before the students. And we think how students can use their talents, their insights, their goals to create the kind of projects and momentums and message for us to keep our water public, preserve health, and really think about how to turn our region away from a much maligned rust belt into what it is that causes things to rust? Water, right? We're in the water belt, and there's a tremendous future waiting for us in economic terms, in social terms, when we think about equity and access. It's a moment of tremendous potential, and we need the minds of students, the creative projects to help us move the needle on that and move towards that water belt, and that's what we're working on. So one of the ways, our latest project that I've pulled up right here is Freshwater Stories. For those people who have a phone, which I know is like no one, right? If you would, open up on your phone to freshwaterstories.com. This is our platform to tell stories from community members on the ground, to get scientific and social scientific facts at the basis of this, and to start conversations about these water issues and to start momentum towards their change. And we released this just 2 months ago, and every month we're focusing on one of these stories to try to build constituencies, networks, and to get things going. So that, again, we're maximizing our water, we're doing the best that we can with it, and we are really paving the way in a world where water geography is changing really rapidly about repositioning our region. So what I'd like to do right now is to do one of the Get Involved activities with everyone here, and you can also go on your phones and answer along as we go, as we do it live. Okay. And we have 3 activities here that we call Source Path People, to get people thinking about the source of their water, its health, who's running it, what's going on, to think about the path that your water takes to get to you, which is what we're doing tonight, thinking about the pipes. And the third section are people, the ways in which we are both connected to one another through our water source and our pipes, and the way that distribution of water, privatization, shutoffs, lead exposure can also sever those connections that are created among people through shared water. So let's go through and talk a little bit about path as a prelude to our all-star panel. Okay, so we know that pipes matter quite a bit. And we know that they're easy to ignore for a pretty simple reason. How often do we see the pipes? Almost never, right? It's something very hard to see. But what those pipes are made of, who controls those pipes, and what's running through it matters quite a bit. So here we kind of give a little guide to what might be going on beneath our feet and some questions. So let's do them together. And then you can answer and enter the data right there on your phones as well. Okay, so who runs the water pipes in your community? Chicagoans? Who runs the water pipes of Chicago? City, yep. Anyone want to give us the department? They take away your waste water, but anyone know the name of the agency? Yep, the Department of Water Management. Okay, any non-Chicagoans in the room that know who runs the water pipes in your community? So you are all very lucky that Monica Lewis Patrick is soon going to be up here to tell you more about that, but that answer is very, very important, because we might take it for granted, right? Some city agency, some state agency runs our water, but there are processes that are likely, now listen to this right now, because this infrastructure bill on the table is such that are likely to facilitate the degradation and rapid privatization of these water pipes and your water supply. So this question of who's running it, train your eye on it. Get the information, right? As it stands, if your water's public, it's answerable to you. Call up the water authority. Who's running different parts? Who's financing it? What are plans for improving it? Who's on the table to buy it? These are questions. This water belongs to us and to future generations and other beings in the ecosystem. And these are questions that you ask all the time. So keep an eye on this one. Okay, this one people can call out, those who know it. So the service line, Melissa, what's a service line?
The pipe that leads from the mains to your home.
Okay, so how many people in the room think that that service line that goes right into your home is made out of lead? How many people certain or suspect it's made out of lead? How many people certain or think it might be made of copper? Steel? Clay? Concrete? PVC? Or I don't know. Oh, okay. Okay, there are some wood pipes around in these cities. So yeah, we didn't put the wood, but we should. Also hard to kind of get this information, but the same thing goes. You can call your water utility and ask, or you can do what I often do is anytime any street work is being done, run up and look down and ask, what are those pipes made out of? A great way. It is probably not research-based, but that's what I got for you at the university today. Okay, what about the water mains, those that go on the street? How many people know theirs is made of lead? Copper? steel, clay, concrete, PVC? I don't know. Right, very hard and hard to find out in the archives, but this is partly why we're doing this activity, is that we're hoping that with all of us on the ground getting these answers and thinking together, we can get a better picture of what our water systems are actually made of. Now, here's the challenge round. We're not going to do it in the room right now, but I do have one brilliant student who has done this. So the challenge round is to try to draw the path that the pipe takes from your source of water to your home. And this is something we're also trying to get ambitious people, also ones who know GIS, like some other of my wonderful students, to get these so that we can have kind of an adequate map. Okay. So I also, and we have such an amazing panel, I don't want to take too long on this, but I want to draw your attention tonight to our freshwater story on laws, lies, and lead in water by Yana Lambrinidou, Jennifer Chavez, and Paul Schwartz. They tell us about the history of lead pipes and plumbing, as well as the background about some of the legislation that does or does not govern them. So let's do one more poll all together, which is, how concerned are you about lead in your water? So very concerned folks, somewhat concerned, not at all concerned, or I don't know. Okay, so also good. I figured probably there aren't so many not at all at a lead pipes event. We also, again, I'm not going to play it right now because we have Melissa Mays here live and in person, but there's a really stirring video on this page of Melissa. And you can see a little bit of map about where lead pipes concentrations are. And we'll also have Michael Hawthorne from the Chicago Tribune up here in a moment, whose reporting has been pretty indispensable in answering this question here in Chicago. So I'm going to give you time to read this on your own, but I want to just come down to a few steps about what can we do. And the authors here make a few suggestions. One is on an individual level. Take immediate steps to prevent exposure. The best that we can probably do right now is to find the right kind of water filter. Right, so here it is. We have some of the world's best water running through some of the most dangerous and damaging pipes. And so in the meantime, while we figure out how to get through this paradox, make sure you're filtering your water. This is a much better solution to bottled water, which is not regulated and you don't really ever know what you're getting. But the right kind of filter can get you the best that you can do with your public water at a relatively affordable price, and it is the best investment. Moving beyond the individual, speak out against misinformation. Right? Here's a moment, and the story really helps to guide you of how to identify that kind of misinformation. Right? When people are not giving you the information, not letting you know the right thing, are coming up with solutions like an epoxy coating, that epoxy coating being produced by the Koch brothers right now. So these are kind of things, and read the story because it helps you navigate, right, how to recognize truthful, helpful information from things that are trying to push your concerns aside or obfuscate what's going on. And finally, demand an end to lead in plumbing. It's not only the pipes, it's also faucets, fixtures, drinking fountains, and the like. And this is really important to do as a consumer. I'm happy to say my mother is here tonight, and she, Rhoda Stammel, recently joined us in Chicago from Detroit. And just thinking through in her house, reading this story, I knew to go through and say, I want you to call the manufacturer and tell me that the shower head has no lead. And that's something that you can do as a consumer and is within your rights, but also press the water utility to stop partial replacements, to stop kicking the can down the road, to refuse to answer the concerns of low-income people whose health is just as valuable as everyone else, blessed to live on Earth, and consider a campaign to remove the barriers, to insist that lead service replacement is a shared responsibility regulation. However, and you can see right here in the story, the people who make the decisions about these laws rarely, if ever, are hearing the view of residents with small children, people who have been harmed, communities with inadequate resources to protect themselves. These are the key voices. And we're going to hear voices tonight from people researching, leading the fight on this issue, but it's really key. I think that we all understand our pipes, understand who's holding the risk, and elevate our own voices on this public health and environmental and social justice issue, that we raise our voice and help to elevate those of others. So please, while you're at the page, there's a chance to take a pledge to prevent lead exposure and also to add your perspective, right? This is this moment of trying to elevate those voices. So thank you for turning out. Thank you for supporting the Freshwater Lab, and we're going to bring Essence back up, and just in advance, and thank you, panelists, for being here tonight to help dispel the misinformation and bring some clarity on the lead pipes issue. Thanks.
Well, first I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. We have quite a few media representatives in the house. So we have CAN TV. We also have the Paul newspaper. I believe we have National Public Media. And so if you have any really uncomfortable objections that you want to make about the recording or also our photographer, please let me know. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our panelists because they are extremely dynamic, absolutely extremely dynamic. So I'm going to start with Monica Lewis-Patrick. Monica Lewis-Patrick is also known as the Water Warrior. She's an educator, entrepreneur, and human rights activist. She is the co-founder, president, and CEO of We the People Detroit. She is also an active member of the People's Water Board Coalition, the U.S. Human Rights Network, and the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Monica was named to the World Water Justice Council in October of 2015, and as a former lead legislative policy analyst for the Detroit City Council, Monica has authored legislation and conducted research and delivered constituency services to thousands of city residents. Up next, we have Michael Hawthorne. Michael Hawthorne is an investigative reporter who focuses on environment and public health issues in the Chicago Tribune. His stories have prompted new laws and health reforms at the federal and state levels, including a U.S. ban on the export of mercury sponsored by the then Senator Barack Obama, rules to eliminate toxic, ineffective flame retardants in household furniture, and tougher safety requirements for Illinois' water utilities. He began his journalism career in Daytona Beach, Florida, and worked at newspapers in Illinois and Ohio before joining Tribune in 2004. Lakeisha Girder is a senior planner and project manager at the Stanhope Consulting, a private firm based in Chicago. She has 9 years of experience in areas of transportation and planning, environmental justice issues, comprehensive planning, and municipal government. She has worked on projects dealing with transportation, infrastructure, climate change, strategic plans for 12 through K and higher education institutions, and youth engagement. Lakeisha recently organized the Northwest Indiana Water Summit, which brought over 120 participants from 12 states to discuss water quality, water accessibility, and water infrastructure. We also have Melissa Mays. She is the founder and activist at What Are You Fighting For?, a website and information hub focused on educating the public and getting everyone together to fight for clean, safe, affordable water. Mays is also a chairman at the Michigan Democratic Party Environmental Caucus and serves as management at the Demise of the Enthroned. Mays is also a concerned mother and resident of Flint who became engaged in organizing after the Flint crisis impacted her life and her family. Brian Anderson is a plumbing instructor at the Plumbers Local 130 UA Apprenticeship Training Center. In his role, he is accountable for developing and teaching the future of plumbing to the next generation of industry leaders. Brian's experience in teaching began while he was serving as a mentor with the United States Navy as a combat electronics supervisor. He then became a licensed journeyman and gained 15 years of experience working in the field. Throughout his career, he has received numerous awards and recognitions for his work within the plumbing trade and is known as a key figure in shaping the future of the industry. Last but certainly not least, I'd like to speak about our moderator for tonight, Tony Anderson. Anderson is founding executive director and board president of the Sacred Keeper Sustainability Lab, an organization dedicated to teaching our youth and communities to inherit the earth. Anderson speaks passionately about the outdoor divide and spreading the word on the importance of reconnecting our youth to the outdoors and civic responsibility. She facilitates environmental workshops on material economies, ecology, exploration, sustainability, and conservation. Tony is also a Chicago Conservation Corp environmental leader, dedicating herself to bring knowledge and resources to the communities she serves. Can we all give a round of applause to this dynamic panel as they come up and begin to give you a little more information.
All right, good evening, everybody. Let's get the show on the road. I, first of all, am fangirling like you would not believe right now. I am such a fan of everyone on this panel. I'm so excited to be here. I want to, first of all, just spend a little bit of time with everybody just introducing who they are again and what it is that you guys do. So let's start with Monica. Let's move this way. Okay. Can everybody hear me? Okay, I'm pretty loud. I'm Monica Lewis Patrick, and I have the honor and privilege every day to serve the citizens of Detroit in the capacity of really advocating for the human right to water. We not only deliver water door to door, because as you may or may not know, since 2014, there's been over 100,000 households shut off from water, and there is no knowledge, or at least nothing that's publicly available as to how many people are still without water. And so we provide a water rights hotline. We also have a youth component called We, the Youth of Detroit, which is providing its own leadership around innovation and ideas and creativity to be able to bring this issue to the forefront. And then we also have a component of our program called Community Research Collective, which is made up of over 50 researchers and scientists and scholars from all across the country that are collaborating behind citizens-based science. And so what they do is allow their expertise to sort of undergird the work that is being led by the community.
I'm fortunate to know Monica quite well. She's awesome. About an hour up the road, Flint has been without clean and safe water for 1,390 days. Yes, lead is a huge major issue. We also have bacteria disinfection byproducts and a whole bunch of other little fun things that make our showers just torture to this day. I got excited to come shower in Chicago because it doesn't burn, so that's pretty awesome. So I have 3 teenage sons, and what happened was they crossed the line when they lied to me. They promised me that the water was safe, it was clean. We still pay the highest rates, 8 times the national average in Flint, and we are 45% at or below the poverty line. So explain that to me. We pay the highest rates for our poison. If we don't, they shut us off, just like Detroit. That's because they don't want the poor and minorities in our area anymore. Our land is worth more than our lives. So, well, found out they poisoned my family just over 3 years ago, and so we started What Are You Fighting For as a portal of accurate information. And we figured if no one else was going to tell us the truth, we were going to figure it out and get it out to the world and to our own town ourselves. There's 100,000 people in Flint who have consumed, bathed in, and brushed their teeth in poisoned water, and the effects are widely unknown, especially on anyone over the age of 6. And so they talk about what happens to the growing brains for kids 5 and under. Your brain grows until you're 25. My teenage sons are suffering. And so that's one of the things we're going to talk about it with the misinformation. We have senior citizens with issues. I have a slew of health problems. So we started going door to door, and we also started, I'm project director at Flint Rising. We go door to door to deliver water, to get information, but mostly to actually build community power, because they're not going to just give us clean water. They're going to take it away, and they're going to charge us for it, but they're not going to do the right thing. So we have been suing since April of 2015, and constantly on and on and on, because it's the only way to get things done. I'm fortunate to be a plaintiff in the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act case, which is forcing the state to pay to replace 18 to 20,000 lead and galvanized service lines, which is only a piece of it. We need the mains replaced, we need the copper lines replaced, we need the interior plumbing and the water heaters replaced. Everything is pretty much contaminated, and also, I mean, they're just bursting. We're losing 60% of our treated water in the ground through holes. So we'll talk about that and pushing legislation. That's when I decided reluctantly, because I'm not a fan of politicians, to be a part of the Environmental Caucus so I can push our legislators to do the right thing and to create the right laws and to stop with these ridiculous loopholes that allow people to be poisoned for profit. So Flint's still without water, but we're still fighting every day because we don't give up. So hopefully we can instill some of that motivation in everybody here. Thank you.
Wow.
I say
My name is Brian Anderson. I am a journeyman plumber with Local 130.
We appreciate you guys.
Well, thank you. We are a portion, or we're a membership of the United Association of Plumbers, Pipe Fitters, Sprinkler Fitters, and HVAC Service Techs. It's an international local, or an international union, and we're the local representative in the plumbing community. We take our jobs very seriously. Our motto is that the plumber protects the health of the nation, and we take that very seriously. Everyone has the right to good water, right? We all agree. Our jobs, I think my position on this panel is to kind of help convey how the day-to-day installation, maintenance, replacement, all of how that can work. Because obviously there's some challenges with what has been brought up already and will continue to be brought up. So hopefully I can provide some insight to that. I don't have a whole lot of expertise on how bad lead is for us. I think we all know that it's bad, right? We don't like it either. We're not for lead. We want to get that stuff out of here. But hopefully I can help explain maybe how that can happen. So.
Thank you.
My background is in urban planning, but I have been fortunate enough to understand the impacts that lead contamination and lead poisoning has had on people from two perspectives. I initially started college as a biology major. I thought I was going to go to med school and become a pediatric neurosurgeon. I was fortunate enough to be accepted into a program where a professor at Northwestern University had received money from the National Institute of Health and the Howard Hughes Medical Institute to do research on lead-based paint poisoning because her 2-year-old son at the time had ingested lead-based paint, and she lived in a home that was probably about 100 years old at the time. And so I was able to spend 5 weeks of my summer at Northwestern University doing research on lead-based paint and contaminations in soil through different community gardens in Chicago. I eventually changed majors. I graduated with degrees in history and political science. I moved into urban planning because I realized I didn't want a PhD, and I just felt like planning was more immediate and I could see the results quicker than being an academic. And plus, I didn't like the academic environment. No offense, but I went to a smaller school, and I was really fortunate to be closer to my professors, and I just felt like the PhD wasn't worth it. So I got a degree in economic development from the University of Cincinnati, and then I came back home to Gary, Indiana, which is where I grew up, and I just got reintroduced to the whole issue about water
through the work I did with the Northwest Indiana Summit, but also being a city planner and working on the regional and local level and seeing how stormwater and water infrastructure is usually a separate conversation from all of the different systems that makes up a city. And just hearing the impacts about how people think that education belongs in one basket and economic development is another basket. I really feel that my job as a planner is to show people how all of these things are connected, because the city is just like a body. It's made up of different systems. And if one part is going bad, you can't just let the other part go bad because everything else is going okay. You have to learn how to triage and manage all of those different systems, because if one system goes bad, it directly impacts the others.
Well, I brought a slide presentation, but we won't deal with that now. I mostly brought it because there's some great maps that we did that show that despite the belief, the widespread belief among political leaders, not only in Chicago but nationally, that the lead epidemic has been solved, it's still a very serious problem, especially in our poorest neighborhoods, not just in places like Flint or Detroit, but right here in Chicago. I initially got interested, I write about environmental public health issues in general. I was especially interested, and I also read a lot and I just ask a lot of questions. I'm that pestering guy who calls up and nobody really usually wants to hear from me because I'm asking them why, Corporation X, why have you poisoned the water supply of town, why? But in this case, in 2012, those of you who are from the Chicago area will recall that there was this unexplained uptick in violence in the city, and it was a front page news story, not just here in our city, but all over the world. And people kept asking the question, how could this happen? And there's a lot of research that's been done at places like the University of Cincinnati and elsewhere about the correlation between lead exposure early in life and problems, first of all, in school, and later problems getting in trouble with the law. There is a group of kids they're now adults, but they've been followed since they were in the womb in Cincinnati. And researchers at the University of Cincinnati have been tracking them their entire lives. They've even taken MRIs of some of their brains. And they found that lead exposure, the science behind lead exposure, essentially it took the place of calcium in their brains when they were really little, and it rewired their brains. You can actually see this on the MRIs, and it affects portions of the brain that involve executive functions. That's basically impulse control, decision making, things that are really important when you're a little kid and you're trying to pay attention and you're trying to learn how to read. Later in life, if you're mad or upset about something, it might be the difference between whether or not you can regulate those impulses or, in the really extreme cases, pick up a gun and shoot someone. If you look at the list of people who, or a census tract list or a map of the city of Chicago in the year 2012 or 2013, and you look at where aggravated assault rates are high or are the highest, that map correlates very closely to the map of where the highest levels of lead poisoning were about 23 years earlier. So essentially the kids or the young people who were committing crimes in the mid-90s were poisoned when they were little kids. That's still going on, even though we've done a great job in terms of reducing the amount of childhood lead poisoning, not just here in Chicago, but all over the country. In Chicago, I believe in 2015, if I remember the last time I looked at the numbers, about 2.5% of the kids 6 and under tested citywide had levels above what the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention say is worrisome, especially worrisome. There's no safe level of exposure to lead. But there are some census tracts within the city of Chicago that as recently as 2015, more than a quarter of the children had elevated blood lead levels. So this is still a problem, and it's affecting disproportionately our poorest and most vulnerable citizens who have a lot of issues already facing them: poverty, lack of jobs, drug trade, you name it. There's a researcher who studied the Englewood neighborhood for many years, Robert Sampson. He's now at Harvard. He used to be at the University of Chicago. And he's gone back after looking at some of the maps that we did a few years ago in Chicago. He's been tracking kids in Englewood since the 90s. And he looked at essentially the imprint of lead on their lives. And one of the first papers that he came out with about a year ago was he said, if you look at the map of lead poison in Chicago, you see not only the historic, but the contemporary impact of lead poisoning on the segregated communities of this city. It's a big problem, but our city leaders, frankly, are not taking it very seriously. And when you talk about lead in water, it's not just the poor neighborhoods, it's everywhere. Because for whatever reason, the city of Chicago required the use of lead service lines until 1996, the very day that the Congress banned the use of lead in the conveyance of water. There's a bunch of potential reasons why that probably happened. One that I'm fairly fond of, and there's suggestive evidence about, is that the lead industry essentially co-opted one of my fellow panelists' predecessors and convinced people that if you had lead, that was good for the plumbers. And there was also a widespread belief, not just in Chicago, but in a lot of cities across America, that lead was really good because it was durable and it was easy to use. And it was long-lived. That's why a lot of these pipes are still in the ground. They were laid maybe in the 1920s or 30s, and they're still around. The problem here in Chicago is, essentially, the city believes there's not a problem, even though we have more lead service lines than any other city in the United States. If you talk to the Chicago Department of Water Management, they'll say there's not a problem, in part because of things that we'll talk about more, the really weird, hinky federal regulations that essentially allow cities the size of Chicago to test a handful of homes every 3 years and say that everything is just fine. 80% of the homes in Chicago have a lead service line. Very few of those homes have been tested. In the last 2-3 years since we've been doing this reporting, a number of people have voluntarily offered samples of their water, and the city have given them free kits. 2/3 of the tests that have come back, and roughly about 2,800 tests have been submitted, 2/3 of those tests came back with some level of lead in drinking water. 2/3. That's just 2,000 homes in a city of 2.7 million people. So this is still a big issue. A lot of money is being spent in this city, low interest loans, doubling of water rates, to do needed infrastructure improvements, to replace the old leaking service lines that go down the middle of the street. But every time the city goes down the street, digs up the middle of the street, and installs a new cast iron lead pipe, iron pipe, they're attaching that water main, connecting houses, reconnecting houses back to those lead service lines. All of this money, all of our tax dollars are being spent on this. And in many other states, pretty much every neighboring state around Illinois, they're addressing this. Michigan is addressing this now. The state of Wisconsin is addressing this now. The state of Indiana is addressing this now. We're not even touching it. If you look at the latest list of projects from the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency of who's going to get low interest loans to do water improvement projects, not a single one of them involves replacing lead service lines. So, and one of the things here is I believe that water officials can correctly say that there's not a problem. They're not violating the law. The problem is with the law itself. And it's sort of like what a longtime Washington writer once said about corruption. The real corruption is not what's illegal, it's what's legal.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for all of your comments. Essence said at the beginning of this, the immensity of the issue, it's just so large. How do we as citizens, everyday citizens, start to even bite down this elephant? It's huge. I'd love for you to be able to speak a little bit to what is going on in the plumbing industry. You said Essence introduced you as leading the charge on changing and shifting a lot of what's going on in the industry. How do we start to even understand what's going on in the lead service pipes and who's accountable to turning that around?
Well, as I understand, the issue with having a lead service, the responsibility falls on the homeowner, the property owner, to replace that, right? So when the city comes through and they put a new water main down the middle of the street and they reconnect these old lead lines to it, that's because the project didn't have replacing all the water services in the original scope of the project, right? The city, their liability for the piping and the maintenance of that piping ends at the sidewalk or the curb or whatever it may be in that particular area, right? A lot of times it's at the, we having a hard time hearing me? It's all right. So a lot of times it's at the valve. We call it a curb stop. That would be where the city's responsibility ends and the homeowners or the property owners picks up, right? So as a plumber, I now work at the apprenticeship school, and I teach the incoming apprentices. That's what a lot of what Essence was talking about has to do with. But previous to that, I've been an estimator and project manager. I've been the guy in the ditch installing the water pipes. I've been the guy up on top telling the guy in the ditch what to do, you know. And so at any point now, it wasn't always this way when since I've been working in the industry, but at any point now, if we encounter a lead pipe, we have to take it out, all of it, from the street, wherever it connects, wherever it ends, whether it's at the curb stop or all the way at the main, which might be under the sidewalk on the opposite side of the street. We have to go all the way to the main and replace all of that into the building. So when I first started, it was, if there's a damaged portion of a lead pipe or a copper pipe or whatever it is, you just cut out the chunk that you have to replace, you put a coupling on each side of it, and you go about your business, cover it back up with dirt, right? It's not like that anymore. And I'm not exactly sure what drives that change, but there is change, right? So at least there's that little bit of glimmer of a hope, right? I've worked on buildings where there's lead pipes going through the walls, and they're not supported at all. And the only reason we knew about it is because somebody trying to hang a picture put a screw into one of them. And it leaked all over the place after the screw rusted out. And then, so they cut the wall open. They say, well, why is this puddle on the floor, and why is it ruining the ceiling in the apartment below or whatever? So you cut the wall out, and you go, holy cow, there's lead in there. You know, I don't know how to fix that. I got to get it out, right? The problem with that is that people that live below and the people that live above, they don't want to rip their walls out, right? So you cut a chunk here and you cut a chunk there and you replace it with copper.
So what can we be doing within our homes? What can we be doing to improve or be aware of how lead is either coming into our homes and how to mitigate that?
Well, I think the biggest thing is going to be a whole nother conversation about where you're purchasing your products from. Mm-hmm. If you're getting stuff that's made overseas that's not regulated, you know, from one of these giant online retailers that you have no idea where the origin is, it's not going to have that little LF mark on it that we have to, as plumbers, we're not allowed to put anything that's even resembles brass unless it says LF on it.
And what is LF?
Lead-free.
Just wanna
Although
make sure
lead-free
everybody
has a
knows.
definition.
And that's changed, right?
Right.
It used to be like, what, some percentage could still be lead?
Exactly.
Right?
It still is, but
Okay.
I don't know what the exact number is. It's very small.
0.08%.
And it has to do with exposure limits and how long the water's in the fixture, and it's very complicated. We as plumbers are governed, we live our lives by codes, right? We have to do everything to a specific code, and that code is driven by politics,
Yeah, so let's get into that.
common sense, some of it maybe.
Before you change the subject, I mean, I think about what we could do with the home, I think there's a few people in the room that I recognize who've heard this from somebody at the EPA before. There's a person, I don't see him here tonight, but he played a big role in what I've learned about lead in water here in Chicago. He played a big role in what we know about what happened in Flint. He works at the regional office here in Chicago. His name's Miguel Del Toro. And he's very popular, and he gets dragged around the country to talk to people. Whenever, say, the current administrator of the EPA is in East Chicago, for example, Miguel gets pulled out of wherever he's at, and he has to go be in the room in case somebody has a question. But he has a very simple message that he says to any group that he speaks to, which is if youth are in any way, you suspect that you might have a lead service line, don't even think about it, get a filter. Everybody should have their water filtered. And the mayor of Milwaukee has already said this. Mayors of other cities have said this. This is one person at the EPA, though. It's not an agency-wide policy.
Melissa.
So what helped drive the change? What they found out, DC had a widespread, massive lead crisis in the early 2000s. What they did was they went in and tried to fix it as cheap as possible. And what they did is they did partial service line replacements. And so what that is when you're connecting the city's part, which is, they use new copper, and they connect it to the homeowner's lead service line, because most homeowners can't afford several $1,000s to have this replaced, or didn't even know it was happening. So what happens when you connect a new copper with an old lead line is it creates an electrical charge inside of the pipe, and whatever corrosion issues you have, it just releases more lead. So it actually exacerbated the lead problem, and that's why 17 years into it, DC still has a lead crisis and a lead problem. So now what we're doing is I'm on a work group actually from the state level and the federal level to change the lead and copper rule to completely ban partial service line replacements. And what we've been working on since then, and even before this, before I even got started, was about making sure that not only is all plumbing lead-free, but solder be lead-free, because a lot of people have copper and like, oh, I'm safe and fine. But do you have lead-containing solder that's holding your copper pipes together? And also the fixtures, they were allowed to have lead in them, a certain larger percentage of lead, until 2014. So think about the last time you replaced your faucets. So this is still an ongoing problem. So what you can do with this is, one, contact your local plumber. That is plumbers are the only people that I trust to identify my plumbing. Let me make that clear, because the state of Michigan, who poisoned us, is trying to tell us what our service line materials are, and this and this and this and this. The only people I will listen to are plumbers, because they are the ones that are down there and they know, and they are the protectors of the health, because we all use water in one way or another. So have them identify it for you. You can call the manufacturer about your faucets if you can remember who did it. And also you need to call your legislator. You need to call your legislator and say, my state Safe Drinking Water Act, the lead and copper rule for my state needs to include 0 tolerance, 0 partial lead service line replacement. And also we have a call coming up that the federal changes that we've been working on for about 20 months are actually moving forward on the federal level. So you guys need to call up your congressperson and your senator and say, look, you need to push for this, push, 0 tolerance, zero reason. There are no good reasons to allow partial service line replacement. Thank you.
Thanks.
I also want to say, I think that we've been having a conversation about homeowners, but there are people who rent. And people who rent need to, usually their landlords have some type of inspection, depending on what place you live at. It happens every couple of years, only happens when they first open the building. And so we not only need to teach people as homeowners, like what are their paths of recourse if lead is suspected, but we have to keep in mind people who use public facilities and people who rent, because oftentimes renters don't know their rights, and that also causes problems because a lot of older buildings, especially in Rust Belt cities like Chicago, like Detroit, they were built in the 20s and 30s, and so automatically, like nobody's forcing the landlords to go out there and replace the pipes unless they're viewed as a threat to public safety. And so you can redirect people to resources, but a renter, if a homeowner might struggle, a renter doesn't have the recourse and they can't replace their own materials. It's up to their landlord. And so you have to be willing to help educate people that are in different places too.
Thank you. Very true. I recently attended the North American Climate Summit, which was here in Chicago. And being in a Great Lakes city, and I'm always approaching the water issue from a climate change perspective, but it always is closely related to how then do we become, as the climate crisis becomes, increases, how then are we even more protective of our water sources? And lead being such a vital part of it. And I'm sitting at this summit and I'm looking through the plans, and the plans were very clear around, carbon emission. That's what most of it is driven by. There's really not a lot of intention toward what we deal with in the water realm. And I was stunned by that. But it was reflective of the fact that in the beginning of the activity that Rachel took us through, a lot of us are not completely aware of what's going on under our feet. Our elected officials are not really aware of how urgent this water crisis is. And what they do know is not completely transparent to us, just like the way water is getting into our homes is not completely transparent to us. So why the lies? Why the cover-up? Why don't we know what we should know about our water? And I'm really wanting Monica to speak up a little bit about this issue because you're very about the whistle blowing, and we can't really advocate for what we are unaware of as an issue.
Well, what we know in Detroit, and I think we take a lot of pride in being the arsenal of democracy and a city that put the world on wheels. But we also have been, along with Flint, the canary in the mine, that there is a critical issue in this country. And one of the things that we've worked with also with many groups here in Chicago around is that as we were dealing with the privatization of public education, which all I was doing was fighting for my children to get a quality education. This is how We the People was birthed. It was just mothers and grandmothers showing up every day fighting for that education. I think Barbara Byrd Bennett had been to Detroit and came to Chicago and then went somewhere else. So we got all of that. And what we know is that many of the culprits that were a part of the contrived bankrupting of the city of Detroit, Jones Day, which is one of the largest law firms, actually was the prosecutor and defender in the bankruptcy trial. Judge Rhodes, who facilitated the bankruptcy and then became the emergency manager over Detroit Public Schools, and now is in Puerto Rico facilitating emergency management over Puerto Rico. When you talk about the DeVos family actually experimented with Detroit and other municipalities in Michigan to privatize public education. Well, the DeVos family is also connected to Veolia, which is part of the international entity that has managing interest in water and also privatization interest in water. They head that up. You can't leave out Rizzo Trash. Rizzo Trash is also connected to the DeVos family. When you start looking and pulling back the covers of the bankruptcy in Detroit, many of the banks that were allowed to actually take public assets and put it under private control are the same banks. You can actually look this up in an article called the Water Banker Barons. And in that article, it lists out all the banks, and every bank on that list was somehow involved in the bond swap deal for the city of Detroit's water. So at the same time when the country was experiencing a housing crisis, many municipalities that were experiencing a financial crisis were also sold these bad bond deals. So while you have a person like Dan Gilbert, who owns the Cleveland Cavaliers, who has bought up downtown Detroit for pennies on the dime, Dan Gilbert is, and Mr. Ilitch, who owns the Red Wings and the Tigers, many of them have not paid their water bills, but their water is not shut off. But they are shutting off systematically households in the city of Detroit because this is about gentrification. This is about urban renewal, if you will, Negro removal, if you will. They have decided that if you are poor and a person of color, you no longer need to reside in places where they can actually remediate the water system. They can use your public dollars, actually set aside democracy. Because in Michigan, what we have is an emergency management law, and you have 37 states across this country that have this law on the books. It is funded by ALEC. In 2005, you had ALEC actually fund an event in Charleston, South Carolina, where they brought together municipal leaders, policymakers, and engineers to convince them that the way to move forward in filling the financial holes in their budgets was to be able to tackle water. Water was the last asset, the last resource that had not seen a major price increase. And so in 2005, they wined and dined them. They gave them a small honorarium, and they gave them the template of how to be able to go back to their municipalities and sell to you that you had to buy into the fact that water was going to cost you more, and it was all based on the fact that you had an antiquated infrastructure and stormwater drainage issues. And what we know in Detroit in 1955, the water director told the city of Detroit and the state of Michigan that if Michigan forced Detroit to actually bond itself, because we were the only city with the bonding capacity to build a water system, that we would eventually go bankrupt. So in 1955, they knew that if Detroit was forced to continue to service these cities, Detroit actually expanded its system over that course of time to 126 municipalities and townships. About half the state of Michigan gets its water from the well that the citizens of Detroit bought and paid for. About at its highest point, it was 4.3 million. Right now, it's about 3.8 million. And you have an entity by the name of Great Lakes Water Authority, which they knew under emergency management. This is the lie that I want to make sure you get before I leave. The lie was that because of the financial crisis in Detroit, the emergency manager in Flint convinced Flint that they had to relinquish their contract with Detroit. Because guess what? Flint was the largest external customer for the city of Detroit. This is why Flint got poisoned. In their haste to steal an international award-winning water system from the citizens of Detroit, they poisoned Flint. At the same time, what they did is they privatized the internal operations. So this was a way to be able to chop up the union. This was a way to steal pensions. The pensioners for the city of Detroit, their biggest investment was in bonds connected to the water department. So when you take out the water department, guess what? You took out Flint, you took out Detroit, you took out pension contracts, you took out union contracts, you were able to sell off, give away, and parcel off parts of the city for nickels on the dime. While at the same time they were telling all of you that Detroiters were just fat, happy, and lazy, that we were a part of failed black leadership in that city. And what I'm telling you is that it was a highly orchestrated system of evil. In the state of Michigan, when you look at the Koch brothers' record, they have heavily invested in many of the universities that we seek for information and validation on the research we do. And what you better understand as young people is they are fully prepared to invest in your confusion.
There you go.
What you know and what is in your gut, you better let it speak to you. And you better deputize yourself. Don't wait for a panel. See, because what I know about this situation that we're in right now as a country, they are fully prepared to kill us. And what I also know about this struggle is that those of us that are willing to speak truth to power, they are fully prepared to kill us. If you don't know the name Charity Hicks, it's a name all of you should know. History will tell you years from now, she was the Rosa Parks of the affordability issue and the water crisis in this country. She is known internationally, but very few people know her stateside. And what she said to us in 2013 leading into 2014 is that water fight was going to be the biggest fight of our lifetime. And she put this out in very tremendous form. She put it out in publications. She was a part of international convenings. So it was nobody that didn't know but us. And when Charity got arrested in 2014 for just knocking on the doors of her neighbors to alert them that they were getting ready to be illegally shut off from water, she was incarcerated and not in a local jail, because we don't have jails in Detroit anymore. You go straight to prison because all of those systems have been privatized. And so it goes back to this privatization issue. Water should be public. Water should be public. There is no way on God's green earth that any human being should have the right to deny another human being access to water. If you look at the Geneva Convention, and this is when it got to my gut, this is when it got personal. My mother is a 24-year combat veteran. She's a military nurse, and she's bad as hell. I mean, I'm scared of it. And what she told me when I told her about Charity's story and them systematically shutting off water, she said, "You need to sit down because I need to have a conversation with you." And what she began to describe to me, she quoted me chapter and verse, the Geneva Convention articles. And she said, you better know what you're up against. And you better accept the fact that if you take this mission on, you're at war. Because shutting off water is an act of war. It's an act of war. And I know this from a lady that doesn't play. I took it seriously. And from that day forward, what we've understood is that we can't wait on anybody to rescue us. Superman's not coming. Batman's not going to drive up. Because in Detroit and Flint, we're still struggling with water issues, and you've heard about it for years now. We've been delivering water door to door for almost 4 years. And so you've got to be prepared for that kind of innovation, that hard work, while you're working on policies, while you're trying to bring others into this work. You cannot allow your neighbor to believe that you don't care about their humanity. You can't believe that this country has the potential to be the greatest country on earth, but we can't figure out how to provide water. There's something wrong with that. There's something wrong with that. And as my granny says, I hope it sticks in your craw.
With adding on to this amazing woman, in the Geneva Convention, it actually says in times of war, you are not allowed to poison the water supply of your enemy. But yet, we wonder in Flint, well, whose enemy are we then? Right. Because everybody who's poisoned us still has their job, their six-figure salary is still in office, nothing has changed. The people that are actually indicted for manslaughter because they covered up, and I'm not going to use the word lie because lie is like, oh, I said something wrong, I said this. No, they're telling us what they wanted us to know all along. They gave us a piece saying, oh, well, Detroit, they just too lazy to pay their water bill, so shut them off. Flint, too lazy to pay their water bill, so we're just going to switch them to this toxic river, and it's going to eat up their everything, but they deserve it because they're poor. Maybe they should have paid their bills. First of all, had we not paid our water bills, our water would have been shut off and we wouldn't be poisoned. So number one, that's one of the stories that they tell you, the misconceptions they want people to believe. They also want you to believe that it's over. They also want you to believe that it can only happen to poor black cities in Michigan. That's not you. That is absolutely wrong. It's happening. That's the way that it is. But it's happening everywhere. I've told everybody that if you drink water, take a shower, brush your teeth, make ice cubes, make coffee, whatever, take a bath, bathe your kids, feed your dog, cats, water, whatever. Guess what? You are a customer. You are the next victim if you're not already being victimized. Whenever water is being treated like a commodity, people can and will die. They are dying. There are hundreds of people that have died in Flint since 2014 in a 2-year period from bacterial pneumonia, which is most likely undiagnosed Legionnaire's disease. But you only hear about the 12. Oh, well, 12. Wrong. Another 177 during that time period that we know of, and we have one hospital that's not reporting out of 3. So the fact of the matter is they are willing to kill people. They don't care about you as an individual or even as a customer. You'd think, why would they kill us off? Because who's going to pay the bills? They don't actually care because what they're going to do is they're going to clear that land out, knock the home down, and then whatever developer buys that land up, they'll pay to replace those pipes. They'll go ahead and to fix that up or just leave it as a cute suburban park because that's what they want out of Flint to turn it to the next Ann Arbor. And the reason I say that with so much bitterness is because Ann Arbor, where the governor lives, found out they had 118 lead service lines. Before one pipe was replaced in Flint, before one pipe, in the height of our crisis, which is still going on, every one of those pipes, they found the money for them. All those pipes got replaced, they don't even have a lead problem. Didn't even have a lead issue, but that got changed. A very wealthy college white town got those pipes out and gone before we had one pipe replaced in Flint. So the reality of it is it's not pretty, it's horrible, and how do you get started? You start at home. You start at home looking at what's most comfortable for you. What do you like? And then you take another step. You take another step. I am a music promoter. I manage bands. I work for radio stations. I did not know water treatment chemistry or how deadly water can be when it's treated improperly. But I had to learn. I had to learn pretty damn quick because our lives are on the line. And then you find out you take an extra step. I said, okay, they're poisoning us here in Flint. Then you go down to a convention in Detroit and find out, oh, they're killing them off by taking their water away completely. And then Monica and I start talking. I'm like, when that water sits stagnant with all those, tens of thousands of households that are shut off, you know what's going to happen? And what's happening? They're getting poisoned now as well. Exactly. So there's bacteria. There's Hep A. I mean, there's all sorts. Shigella. We actually have dysentery in Flint. And I was like, oh my God, is this Oregon Trail? But then we get told by a certain PhD that, oh, well, you poor, uneducated, dumb and dirty people in Flint, you have Shigella because you didn't wash your hands, because you're too scared of the water. Excuse me, we have Shigella because we didn't wash our hands. Thank you very much. So, that's the issue is that we're dealing with, is that, first of all, the government, the corporations, everything, the dirty under, not even talking about our pipes, everything evil that lies underground has been wanting you to believe these stories, okay? And then we yell and scream about it, and they make us look like we're crazy, which is fine, maybe we are, and whatever. But then what happens is that then you get these college-educated people with PhDs saying, no, you're just a mom, calm down. What do you know about this? No. You can't possibly inhale, this bacteria or this. You can't possibly worry about chloroform. You have 100% possibility of chloroform in your shower. Well, that's not a problem because it's not regulated. So you can start by writing letters. You can start by asking your legislators if they took a shower this morning, and if they did, was it safe? And if they say yes, you shut them down because we have 0 bathing and showering standards in this country. Did you know that? Nothing to make sure that our hot water's clean. Just a 1-minute cold tap sample for lead sampling. That's what's regulated. Hooray! None of us. Does anybody here take a 1-minute cold shower in their kitchen sink? No. So there are little things that you can do, pieces. That's what we did with our websites. Just little pieces you can start with and then push and push. Start with letter writing, phone calls, showing up to rallies, come to visit. Flint's not that bad. I mean, actually, it's kind of a nice place. I like to stay there. I mean, Detroit's awesome. We got stuff. That's why they're stealing from us. That's why they're wanting us out, because we got stuff. So come visit, and we'll teach you a lot, whatever you need to know. But every single person can make a change, and no one voice, no matter if you have a PhD or not, should go ignored, and don't think that you're not any less powerful than anyone else around you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
One comment, because I know we're running on time, and I want to be able to make sure that you guys get some questions in as well. But one of the things that I always think about when we have these really intense conversations around water, particularly what's going on in East Chicago and at CPS schools and in Flint, because Flint gets a lot of attention, but we got many Flints happening all over Illinois. And there's little knowledge on them until they get to the escalation. One of the things that I really care about is making sure that we understand what's going on before it becomes crisis. So being in rooms like this are pretty vital. But one of the things I get really worried about when I leave, and even in my organization did a lot of work on making sure that we got water to Flint, but it feels kind of counterintuitive to be so scared of your drinking water that we're purchasing bottled water from the very companies who are benefiting from our hysteria. So I want to talk a little bit about that privatization of, we've got the Koch brothers of the world who are really making sure that they're in the right position to capitalize on our fear. And for Flint, yeah, you got to do bottled water, but as a Chicagoan, we don't. But after conversations like this, we all want to go home and not drink what's coming out of our tap because these conversations make us fearful. So I want to talk a little bit about that.
I think the simple thing is, we're blessed. We live on a lake that's part of 20% of the world's fresh water. We're very lucky. Other countries, other states want our water. That's why we've fought so hard to protect it and keep it here in the Great Lakes Basin. I go back to what Miguel Del Toro from EPA said. If you live in a home that was built before 1996, get a filter. That's it. These other issues, 86? Did I say 96? I'm sorry, 86. Beyond that, talk to your elected officials. Here in the city of Chicago, we're fortunate. We have some of the, actually, unlike Flint, which has, I believe the last time I looked, the most expensive water rates in the country. Mm-hmm. I believe there are only 4 other municipalities or municipal regions of the United States that have less expensive water than we do here in Chicago. It's remarkable. Even after Emmanuel doubled our water rates, we still have some of the cheapest water. But then the next question, and that city officials, the mayor himself, have never answered, is if we're digging up the streets to improve our infrastructure, why aren't we coming up with some kind of plan to deal with this toxic metal that's still bringing water into our homes? Other states, I say again, other states are starting to address this. You have two of the most conservative lawmakers in the state of Wisconsin have sponsored a bill that I believe the governor has actually signed. So you've got a Republican governor, Republican-controlled legislature. They're starting a program to go community by community and have essentially like either a low-cost loan or grant or somehow roll the cost of replacing the service line into the rate base. There are ways of doing this. The city of Madison, Wisconsin did it. Lansing, Michigan is doing it. There's all kinds of technological fixes. In Lansing, I've seen a really cool video where some great engineers figured out a way to essentially thread a new copper pipe from the street to the home and pull the old lead pipe out when they pull this device back. Saves thousands of dollars per home. Why aren't we doing that here? Why aren't we even having that conversation here in a city that has more lead service lines than any other city in the United States? It's just not happening. And so having sessions like this are great. The Flints of the world, that was a criminal act, right? People are potentially probably going to go to jail for a criminal act. That was a criminally managed water system. We don't have that issue as far as we know here. They did try to privatize, Mayor Daley did try to privatize the fact that we have this parking meter deal that we're paying a company based in Saudi Arabia until the end of this century for money that we've already spent, that Mayor Daley already spent. That basically took the privatizing water off the table because privatizing the parking meters did not go over so well. So we lucked out there. And we have other large cities like Atlanta, Georgia that tried that and went back to public water. So we're very fortunate on a lot of things. But it shouldn't take an East Chicago situation where they're cleaning up lead-contaminated properties and then they, oh, by the way, maybe we should check the water. And, oh, yeah, we've got a lead water problem too. Let's replace all the lead service lines. It shouldn't take essentially these environmental justice hotspots to address a problem that affects everyone.
Well, thank you, and I want to, go ahead.
Well, the last point I want to make, I think that we're just at a point where because of how our government structure is set up, cities, townships, counties, states, to some degree, have more control over what they considered as the minimum standard that's safe for water consumption as opposed to the national government. And even when you talk about how do I find out what type of pipes I make, the burden is on the homeowner to go get that information. And people don't realize this is not something you can just go find in a Google search. Like in the water company, Indiana American Water in Gary, you have to call them for them to locate your utilities because you can't go to the city and say, I want a map of where my water line is. We're at a point where water is not something, it shouldn't be 50 different standards for water. It should be one national standard. And when you go to places like the Netherlands, Amsterdam is like a water-based city, Copenhagen, other countries, they're decades ahead because they have actual water planning because they know that if it was some type of national crisis, they need to know where all of their water is going. Somehow in this country, we know our highway system, and that's national. We know where all our nukes are floating around. But I bet you, hopefully, but I bet you can't go to the EPA in Washington, D.C. and say, show me a map of where all the water lines are in the United States. Because they don't have that information. And they trust that these private companies have good record keeping. And we found out that oftentimes disenfranchised communities, they'd have poor record keeping. And so it's not as simple as going to ask this politician or this legislator for something that you should know about. So I think that we need to stop saying that, you know what, we should make this a state thing. We need to have multiple state partnerships and just make it a national issue. Because at the end of the day, water is not Republican or Democrat. Everybody needs water. 70% of your body is water. Water is the most important resource that you will need in the 21st century. The UN knows this because they have 2 development goals out of the 17 millennial development goals related to water. We're still sitting here in the United States trying to fight about whether climate change is real. And I just, like, to me, people sit here and talk about weather as it relates to climate change, but the other W in climate change is water. Because a lot of the reason why we have all these fluctuations in temperature is because ice caps are melting. Everybody knows when ice melts, it turns into water. Even Lake Michigan right now has some of the highest water levels that it ever had historically. And nobody's panicked about it because we think more water is great. But a couple of years ago, we were panicked about Lake Michigan because they had lower level water levels than usual. But we have to start taking it upon ourselves to educate ourselves and educate each other. Because if you don't know it, chances are your neighbor doesn't know it. And so you have to pull together, because a politician doesn't always listen to one person. But if it's 100 angry neighbors on that politician's doorstep and they know that's 100 votes, and since people haven't been voting in such a high rate that they used to, that one vote really does make a difference, they will listen.
Thank you. Thank
But
you
I
very
think
much.
at that point, we've got to really highlight 2 things very quickly, is that if emergency management is on the books, you can vote and your vote will be nullified. And this is what happened in Detroit and Flint. So people voted. In 2012, the last Obama election, Detroit actually yielded the highest voter turnout that it had in 30 years. So we voted. But then you had under this governor, which has hijacked the state of Michigan, he appointed several other criminals to have governance over us. And that one individual, the only thing they're obligated to do, the only thing is to pay Wall Street. They don't have to fix anything. They don't have to honor any union contracts. They don't have to honor any votes of the people. They can set aside your city council, or here I know you have a ward system. All of that is nullified. And so what you need to know in Chicago and in Illinois, you have the emergency manager law on your books. So it's bigger than that. And as it relates to homeowners and renters, well, we know in Detroit, 50% of our residents are renters. Do you know that there are tens of thousands of houses that are owned by people that live somewhere else on the globe? And that there is no process that they have in place because, as the city planner alluded to, in Detroit, we still have much of our information on index cards. So while you've got them building arenas and stadiums and things of that nature on the backs of the working poor of that city, at the same time, infectious diseases that Melissa alluded to, we actually worked with Global Health Initiative. Henry Ford Hospital is the largest health provider in southeastern Michigan. With that health provider, we worked with them and we brought to their attention, are you tracking infectious diseases that may be waterborne? Are you looking at this? They said no. Why? Because 70% of the people that work in Detroit don't live in Detroit. So they didn't even know there was a water crisis. And then when we raised the issue, we worked with them for 2 years to work collaboratively with our water shutoff data and the public health data. Guess what? A week before we were supposed to jointly release this information to the public, because Henry Ford had $2.2 billion of contracts with the city of Detroit, they decided it just wasn't that big of a deal. This is after you've had what is now on record as the largest epidemic of hepatitis A in southeastern Michigan. So this is what we're dealing with, and it's real. And I'm telling you, infectious diseases will not stop at poor folks and black folks and people of color's door. Infectious diseases, when people come in for their ball games, or suburbanites just come to visit for the day, guess what? That person that's providing you your water may not have access to water. Or the pipe that you may have gotten your water from, or the dishes that were washed to serve you your dinner, may be lead contaminated. And as was stated before, and I thought you did such an eloquent job of stating it, it's one water. It's not Lake Michigan, Lake Erie. We put those names on there. But in terms of the creator, The water system is one. It's an ecosystem. So we're all connected. And I think you've got to think about this from a policy standpoint, from a human rights standpoint, that we are connected. I need you. I need you to care that I have water. And guess what? I'm not going to leave here without making sure you understand that I care that you have water. It's a human right.
Thank you so much. All right, we're gonna open it up to get some questions from you all. We have a question over there. Oh, I got chills.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Christiana. You mentioned that there was a program in a city that hollowed that their way of replacing the pipe was to go through the
Oh,
old
yeah, Lansing,
piping.
Michigan, yeah.
It was Lansing, Michigan. Okay.
Yeah, if you Google that, there's a cool video that the city did. You know, one of the things that initially after some of my reporting from a couple of years ago, you know, television stations, sorry TV, went out and you know, and then they did the requisite. They found a contractor. You know, and the contractor said, "Oh, this is going to cost thousands of dollars, and there's no way we could afford to do this." What Lansing did is they said, "This is our priority as a city. We're going to start replacing these things. We're going to make it a priority." And then somebody came up with this system. I'm not sure if they did it in house or if somebody else did it, and it's essentially threads the new copper pipe, and kind of the copper pipe is I think if I remember right, it's a smaller diameter than the lead pipe. And it goes in, and then at the other end they connect it to the fixture inside the house, and then when they pull this, it's almost like I'm trying to think of what it is. It reminded me of like an old Slinky toy. Mm-hmm. When I looked at it, it was wrapped up, and when they would pull it back, it would just pull the lead with it, and so boom, it's gone. And what the engineers said was so beneficial about it is instead of digging up the entire street. If they weren't doing other types of work, they would just essentially like dig a couple of small holes where they could thread the pipe down, and then have a plumber or one of the workers go down and fix or connect the new pipe to the water main.
Well, was it like it is here in Chicago where everything stops at the curb? Did Lansing own all of the water pipe?
Well, it kind of depends on the municipality. What I've found in my research is that some places like Lansing and Madison, Wisconsin, well, Lansing was the only one. They actually made a declaration that the entire water system going up to the house is part of the public infrastructure. So they made that decision. So Yana, who was mentioned at the beginning here, who works at Virginia Tech, who's a researcher at Virginia Tech, she's noted that here in Chicago, there's actually no clear law that says that it's the private property of a homeowner, the part that goes from the shut-off box to the home. It's more, I think, the impression I've gotten from a lot of people in the water world is that they're fearful of this coming onto my property kind of mentality. Cities have gotten around that. Indiana is getting around that. A lot of those like property rights folks in Wisconsin and Indiana, they've gotten around that by saying, okay, hey, homeowners on street, let's say homeowners on Halsted Street, we're going to be replacing the water main from the 700 block to the 1100 block of South Halsted. We have this program where if you want your lead service line replaced, we will do that work, and either we'll loan you, you'll have to pay it back slowly over time through your water bill, some kind of way that makes it relatively affordable, where it's incorporated into your water bill. Madison got rid of every single lead service line, essentially by that kind of system. Boston's still doing it. I think it's important to note, though, Boston stopped laying lead service lines in the 1940s, and we kept doing it, for another 40 years. So we've got a lot of it. It's a big issue here in Chicago, but so is the replacement of these water mains. And I've had the most conservative readers of the Chicago Tribune call me up and say, essentially, excuse my French, but like, what the hell? They're digging up my street and they're not replacing this lead service line? I don't get it. That's a waste of money. And it's hard to argue with them.
I'll let you comment, but we want to make sure we're giving everybody who wants to ask a question a chance to do so.
I have one over here.
With Lansing, the reason Lansing did it is because that's our state capital where all our legislators are. But also, so that's why they did that. But also what they did was they went a block by block. They replaced all the mains and all the lines. So that's why they ended up taking primacy over the whole entire line. And for our lawsuit in Flint, where we wanted to say you have to replace up to the meter in the home, we brought up the point that we don't own that water meter. We can't walk away and take it with us. So technically, we don't own anything past that. So it's a good argument you might try to use.
You have other questions?
Yeah, a couple of quick questions. First of all, on the issue Professor Haverlock raised about the bottled water, what about Nestle's extracting water from Lake Michigan and then selling it commercially? But a more important issue is the depletion of fresh water supplies throughout the country by this bottled water. Secondly, a takeoff on Erin Brockovich, what about the state of Indiana allowing chromium to be deposited in the lake, and we're getting hexavalent chromium in Lake Michigan, which exceeds the California water standards, according to Deborah Shore, Water Reclamation Commissioner. And third, this business of the retrogression back to fossil fuels. The Amoco Whiting, Indiana facility has built a pipeline that goes into Lake Michigan to deposit its ammonia that's used to extract the impurities from tar sands. And what can we do about this if the state of Indiana is given legal permission? And that relates to what Professor Haverlock raised before about the Enron lines across the Mackinac Straits, which will increase the flow of the tar sands and possibly endanger the whole water supply of the Great Lakes region if the pipes burst.
I mean, he's like reading my greatest hits there. I mean, this is, he's my kind of guy here. What was your first question again? It was Nestle, yeah. So Nestle, I think, Nestle's got this bottling factory for Ice Mountain in Michigan. They were originally going to locate it in Wisconsin, and Wisconsin said, no, you can't have our water. It was a big fight. Michigan said, okay. Michigan's the only state that's entirely within the drainage area of the Great Lakes, right? And so there was a lawsuit. They lost the lawsuit, but folks said that essentially what they were doing, people got really freaked out by the idea, 25 years ago, that this Saudi Arabian company wanted to bring giant super tankers into the Great Lakes and take water away. And I'm remembering the the first paragraph of a story that I wrote 15 years ago, which was essentially they were worried about these super tankers, and instead it's leaving in these little bottles, and it was a whole water rights thing about whether the spring that they were drawing from was somehow affecting the hydrology that connects the spring to the lake, in this case, Lake Michigan. And they lost that case. And so Nestle has the right to do that. What's happened since then, though, is the states that are and the provinces that are around the Great Lakes have passed what's called a compact. It was approved by the Congress, and it sets out a whole bunch of legal requirements for who can have our water. And essentially it means that if you are outside the area that drains into the Great Lakes, then you have to cross a lot of other hurdles. There's exceptions for example, breweries. That's a lot of water. And those cans of Miller, go all over the world. And there's still, some of it's still brewed in Milwaukee, for example. Ice Mountain is another one in there. There was a whole fight, Waukesha, Wisconsin. Half of the community is on the Lake Michigan side of the subcontinental divide, and half of it drains toward the Mississippi River. They just approved a plan to let Waukesha get water from Milwaukee. They have to treat the water and send it back to Lake Michigan, so there's no excessive water loss. So they have to treat it adequately. And I think what's interesting is there was also a payout there where the city of Waukesha had to pay several $1 million to help replace lead service lines in poor neighborhoods of Milwaukee. The last one on chromium in Lake Michigan, there's a U.S. steel mill at the port of Indiana. They've had a lot of problem dumping hexavalent chromium, which is used to rust-proof steel, basically chrome, among other things, right? And they've had a problem at that particular facility where illegal discharges of hexavalent chromium, which you might, if any of you saw the movie Aaron Brockovich, that was the bad stuff at issue in that movie and in that real life scenario. That's an enforcement case that the US EPA is going to have to deal with, and the state of Indiana. Stay tuned. With this current administration, you don't know. It takes angry citizens, upset people, nice readers of the Chicago Tribune, to get upset about it and get politicians to do something. Last thing, really quickly, BP refinery in Whiting, they wanted to dump more pollution into Lake Michigan in 2007. They said that they needed to do that so they could get 80 more jobs at the refinery and they could process more Canadian crude oil. People like yourself and others around the Great Lakes got very upset. Actually, then Congressman Rahm Emanuel made the then head of the Indiana Department of Environmental Management cry before television cameras. And later, the North American CEO of BP came to Mayor Daley's office and said they were going to back down. But it's still a problem because they still are releasing too much mercury into the lake, way more than any other facility should be allowed. That's still happening. They promised that they were going to stop doing that, but then they decided not to invest in the technology that good scientists at Purdue, Calumet, and other universities came up with. So it really takes involved citizens and whatever nonprofit groups there are still out there keeping watch. And unfortunately, it pathetically takes people like me writing stories about it. So, but I thank you for reading.
We have time for maybe 2 more questions.
Here, so my question is for Brian, which is, why isn't the plumbers union beating down the door of the mayor's office saying, hey, we got a big contract here, we got a health crisis, and money makes people move a lot. And so I'm just curious why the plumbers union isn't more strongly advocating to get involved, especially with all the water main replacements. It seems like a missed opportunity for you guys and the rest of us.
Great question.
Well, I can't speak for the plumbers union specifically. I'm not in their decision-making rooms, but it is an excellent question. It definitely would put more people to work in our trade, and we're for that. The people who would benefit the most would be the contractors, and that would be maybe a question for one of our several plumbing contractors associations that we have that are on the other side of the negotiating table when it comes to contracts with the local. So I don't know that there's a short answer or that I even have the right answer for you. I can say that we're definitely for trying to get this stuff ripped up and replaced, but as with everything, follow the money, right? Where's the money coming from? When you're driving down a street and you see that a road is being ripped up and they're replacing gas mains, a lot of that's been going on in Chicago over the last couple of years. And why are they not doing the water main with it? Well, because the gas company's paying for the gas main. Somebody's got to pay for the water main too, right? And not that it isn't a human right to have clean, safe water. We all agree with that. I think it's more a matter of who's going to pay for the bill, right? And unfortunately, that's what it ends up with, and I don't have the answer how to fight that, to be honest.
I also think it depends on how comprehensively you plan for a project. Like Brian said, when ComEd comes in and says, I'm doing a gas project, sometimes if they say, hey, let me call the water company and ask them, do they want to go in with me and do any work underground? Sometimes they'll tell them no, and then 3 years later they'll say, well, we're coming in and doing our capital improvement project, when those utilities should all be coordinated so they go under the ground once. Because oftentimes they'll wait till after a road improvement has been done, They bust up the street, and then the infrastructure isn't the same, and then you get mad because that creates more potholes and everything else. And so constituents have to push for people to do better coordination above ground and below ground. Also, in terms of just why don't people work together, I think that we in municipal government have to get away from this perspective that everything has to be done at the lowest cost. And a lot of times people don't want to push for improvements because A, they're already resource strapped, so they don't have the money, and then B, we have all these rules where people have to get the person that bids the lowest to do the work. And at the end of the day, there are some things where you want the lowest cost because you want to be financially responsible, but how much of a price tag can you really put on your water and your utilities? And that's going to take constituents saying, well, I would make an exception for this, and I would be willing to pay more in order for it to get done right the first time, because if it's not done right the first time, the cost still gets passed on to you because you're going to have to pay for it to get done again.
And if I'm willing to pay that cost, I want to make sure that those changes are impacting me. I don't want to be paying for somebody else to benefit from what I'm paying for. I just had to say that.
But you're going to be paying along the way anyway.
Yeah.
Yes,
Because
and-
if you're not paying for the water infrastructure, then you're paying to subsidize the healthcare costs. You're subsidizing the other hits that families may take. There's the multiple deaths in Flint, multiple deaths in Detroit. So now you have children that are being transitioned into foster care. So there is a cost to pay. The question is, are we willing to make the investment on the front end, or are we wanting to deal with all the fallout on the tail end?
And then people also just need to realize that people need to stop doing things in separation.
That's
Everybody who's involved in something, they all need to be at the table. But how we organize and program things, the policymakers sit in the room together, the scientists sit in the room together, the engineers, all of them need to be in the same room talking to each other. And if they don't understand each other's languages, they need to figure it out, because like Monica said, you're going to pay on the front end or the back end, and chances are you're paying more on the back end than the front end. And my mom always taught me, do it right the first time or you're going to have to do it again. There are so many projects that have cycled through city governments that we've had to pay more for on the back end because everybody wasn't in the room and it wasn't communicated that everybody needed to have their input to do this project right once, as opposed to going back later and redoing it.
Thank you. We have one more question back here.
Okay, thank you. Well, my name is Shai Delano Roosevelt. I'm a newscaster as well. Shy, not shy at all. Only shy in name only. And that's what we need to be, not shy about getting this taken care of. So 2 questions. What would be the best filter? Because between this and I say the fluoride deception as well, you know, the documented by the same name as well, what would be the best for us to have? And also, I think the more importantly, as the person on the front end there, how do we change the psychology? How do we change the minds of people? How do we get to learn to teach people to care about you? I don't see you. This out of sight, out of mind. This distractions that we see in the news. You know, Trump, and I don't even cover Trump anymore. He's garbage to me. You know, it's just distractions to keep us from the real issues, like the things that are going on in Michigan. So how do we? What kind of mass educational program will we have to undertake to get people's minds and people to understand that they are trying to kill us? And when do you care about you're going to be killed? You're going to be being killed. Okay, I'm all right. It's lull. So thank you. So those 2 questions, please. Thank you.
Well, I know for us in terms of our struggle, it's been about connecting with other organizations and other individuals. And so we have used everything in our arsenal. I mean, we had the EPA tell us last year that we couldn't test our water, that if we partnered with any university to test our water, that they would destroy the career of the professionals that were working with us. So what did we do? We actually accelerated the program and did it even faster. Organized a bunch of folks. Our young people through EMEAC and through here, Little Hovos and those kinds of initiatives, they're using rap and spoken word and poetry. And really that was a big part of what catapulted our work, because it was our babies in Detroit that were traveling the globe doing hip hop that began to share our stories, or they would play parts of my speeches when they would be performing. And then those opportunities then brought us into other spaces. We intentionally connect our work. So I never go anywhere and talk about Detroit without talking about Flint and Melissa and all their amazing work. So it's that cross-pollination. And now Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico's been to Detroit several times. I'm on my way to Puerto Rico next week. We have a monthly call with Cochabamba to connect to that global struggle. And what Cochabamba has done is they're really educating us around their new governance structure, where over 60% of the governance over their water is women. How phenomenal is that? Yeah. And so it's that kind of learning. We are learning as we go. This is a classroom. What we've done is we've said, and I use this term a lot, we've deputized ourselves to say we're committed to ensuring that humanity has water. Because for me, it's not just about me, and it's not just about Detroit, as much as I love Detroit. It's about being able to look in the eyes of my children, and I want them to know that I love them enough to dedicate my life to ensure that all humanity has water. Because as we hear, if it's lead contaminated, there's a result. There's a reaction for that. If people don't have it, we know that wars have been fought over water. And I believe we're on the verge of one now. With us sitting on 20% of the world's fresh water, 20%. Do you know that the emergency manager, one of the things Kevin Orr proposed, is selling Detroit water and sewage to China? So in the wake of this idea that the market will fix it, that the market will fix whatever is ailing us, we've all figured out that that's not the answer. It's only in our collective convening as the planner. I just love to call her the planner. I know Lakeisha, but I love that she's the planner. But what she talked about is really where we've got to go. Why is it that the water department's not talking to the lighting department, not talking to the gas department? Because we allow siloing to happen, and then what happens with siloing? You have what you have right now, where people voted their interest, where they have decided that as long as me and my household are okay, then I don't care what happens to the rest of the world. And so that individualism has led us to this place of austerity and fascism. And what we have to decide is to take it back. And so I'm looking to many of you to do that. I'm excited about your presence in this space because I already know that you've deputized yourself in this fight. Now what I'm going to be looking for is what are our collective solutions to solve this in our lifetime so that your children will not have to face this disenfranchisement.
As for the filters, let me just tell you one thing that we've learned in Flint. So if you're going to get a filter, you need to, even if you just go get one of those $30 test kits at Home Depot to let you know if there's a presence of certain bacteria and things like that, because the state decided to go ahead and start passing us out these Brita and Pure tap filters, not caring the fact that there's literacy issue about the average is 3rd grade level, and those little pieces and parts are tiny, so our senior citizens can't put them on. So we've had to go door to door to do so. However, you run hot water through them once by accident, they're done. Also, Wayne State has been trying to get this study out for, like a year, and the state of Michigan has blocked it, as well as some other PhDs, I'm not bitter, that the tap filters, the ones that attach to the tap, actually grow bacteria. We have a bacteria problem in Flint. You may not have one, so that's fine. If you are going to get a lead-reducing filter, get the zero water pitcher, because it actually has the 5 stages. But please, if you're going to do so, until you've had your water tested for bacteria, please filter and then boil your water to be on the safe side, because you don't know what's growing inside that filter, especially the stuff that wraps around the filters. We had to find that out the hard way, and that's how we had people come up with dysentery, because the bacteria actually grew on the tap filter. So, and we keep them away, especially with children. We keep them away from the sink because sometimes they accidentally run hot water through it, and there is no test for it. Also, it's only rated up to 150 parts per billion of lead. We've had levels as high as 22,900 parts per billion in Flint. And as a few months ago, 12,500 still popping through. So that 150 is nothing. So you just need to get educated, find out what's in your water, talk to your local plumber, find out what your plumbing is. Even, even as a renter, you can at least have them identify the plumbing, I mean, just whatever needs to be done. But you have to be educated, and you have to ask questions and demand answers. And then I agree with the Philo. Thomas Frank from East Chicago is sitting right up there. We're part of the National Coalition for Lead-Free Water, and that's one of the things we're working on, is connecting all of these cities that are being impacted and working on solutions, as well as uplifting each of our stories, because we're not in this alone. And I think that's the scariest part. When you jump in, you feel like you're in it alone, and you're absolutely not, but then you get even more terrified realizing that there's another 5,300 cities out there violating the lead and copper rule. So absolutely connect with one another. And even in Detroit, our stories weren't the same. They were similar, but now they are. Now we have shutoffs and both have contaminated water. So that is the unfortunate thing, but we're in this together.
Lakeisha, you had a...
Okay. And my last point, I just want to say people need to emphasize social planning. Third world countries, when they come up with plans, they make sure that the plans that they come up with do not have adverse consequences for human beings. And for some reason in the United States, the last time we did social planning in earnest was under Franklin D. Roosevelt when he passed New Deal legislation. And it took a world recession and a Great Recession for us to think about how can we plan for people. We basically need a new Deal. And if people don't push for that, also another problem, the fact that corporations have personhood. Until corporations stop being considered as people before actual people, we're going to keep having these problems.
This has been absolutely amazing. It is hard for me to even ask this question of what have we left out or not addressed. I think we've hit everything, but is there anything burning, parting directive or call to action that you would like this room to take? That you haven't already asked them to do.
I think I already shouted orders.
The Water Act.
So we have, you need to contact your congressman or woman to support the Water Act. Congressman John Conyers had introduced it. We've had several congressmen sign on to it. And what that is a federal bill that will tax corporate offshore profits, because how about those corporations start paying their taxes, right? To close the loophole and tax corporate offshore profits at a small 3%, don't cry about it, but it will provide $35 billion a year in infrastructure funding. So then the government can take that money, which would be given to the EPA, to grant, not loan, grant cash-strapped and bad credit cities, which how do cities get credit anyways? It's whatever. Like Flint, Detroit, every city would be able to get grants to fix failing infrastructure, as well as update and change infrastructure. And it would also cover hospitals, daycares, schools, things that are left out by the Lead and Copper Rule and Safe Drinking Water Act, where our most vulnerable people are, including reservations, because let's not talk about the fact that we're up here complaining about our lead pipes. They have no pipes or clay. So they are worse off than we are. So it will uplift us all. So please, it's very simple. It's a 7-pager, not long. It's very straightforward. John Conyers Water Act, please get a hold of your congressperson and push that.
I also want to say today Trump released his fiscal year 2019 budget. He cut GLRI, which is Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding, by 90%, from $300 million to $30 million. You need to be banging down the doors of all your legislators, because that money that goes towards keeping the type of wildlife in your lake to make it sustainable so your water can be drinkable. That goes to water testing and native planting and so many different projects that helps make your lakes and your drinking water sustainable. And they're basically showing you, if they're willing to play with your water, they don't care about any other aspect of your life. And anybody who votes against that, and any politician going forward that's willing to tamper with your water, you need to get them out of office immediately. They don't deserve a second shot at trying to poison you once they mess with your water, because that's the foundation for everything that you do in life.
Ashe, ashe, ashe. I am all about the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. I go to DC every year with the Great Lakes Alliance to march all up and down everywhere to get that funding restored and increased, because not only does it help with our habitats and our green infrastructure, the money for the infrastructure of our pipes is in that budget. So we can't afford for that money to go away. We need to keep the GR, so follow the GRLI. Please, please do whatever you can to get on board with any petition or lobbying that you see going on. And as Lakeisha said, if your elected official is not behind that, get them out. Move them out. This has been an incredible, incredible evening. Big thanks to the UIC Freshwater Lab and the team that has done incredible work to bring this event about. Our panelists, amazing, Monica, Melissa, Brian, Lakeisha, and Michael, thank you so much for coming out and sharing your wisdom and your passion and your heart and your soul with us this evening. I am definitely I'm in the work and I'm inspired to keep fighting because I know that we have community in these issues. And it's so important that we know that we have community and people who are fighting the fight with us, who are leading the charge, and we need to do whatever we need to do to keep them supported and restored so that they can keep doing the work, because it's hard work, and we're at war. So we need to make sure that we're taking care of our warriors and our soldiers by supporting their call to actions as much as we can. So thank you so much for being here this evening, and follow the issues. Follow UIC Freshwater Lab. Get on that website, and if you could do me a big favor as you leave this room, just in the beginning of the activity, a lot of people kind of really don't know what's going on underneath their feet. Once you find out, tell a young person in your family, tell your children, tell your grandchildren, your nieces, nephews, whatever youth you've got access to, tell them how water works. Let them know what's going on, because they are the ones that need to figure out what part of this fight they continue. But the problem is a lot of us don't know how our water works, or our youth are being left out of the conversation. And I am one very passionate about making sure that we don't churn out another generation that doesn't understand what the issues are. So thank you so very much for coming out this evening.